Are you after a sleek, thin, and incredibly powerful gaming laptop that doesn't completely decimate your bank account? Well, this is the PCSpecialist Recoil II, and it might just fit that category. Now, I would mention there's a few things that if you're planning on picking this laptop up, I think you should hear first before you do so, but it's definitely an interesting shout, so let's take a look. So let's start off with the spec. This one has the new i7-8750H 6-core CPU, and of course that one is running at lower clock speed in the sort of 2.2 gigahertz range, at least on its base, so just bear that one in mind, but it's still a 6-core CPU, which makes it pretty powerful for a gaming laptop. In terms of the GPU, it's a GTX 1060 6GB, and otherwise, because it's PC Specialist, the rest of the configuration is pretty customizable. The model I have has 16 gigs of 2400MHz DDR4 Corsair Vengeance RAM. The SSD that's in here is a 500GB Samsung 960 EVO M.2 drive, and we also have a 1TB hard drive as well, although taking a look inside, you can see that there is space for an extra M.2 SSD if you wanted to mount one, or if you wanted PC Specialist to add one in for you. A bit of a physical tour of the device. You have on the top of the clamshell a brushed aluminium sort of plain aesthetic look, which does look pretty nice and obviously is very stylish, although it is very heavy for fingerprint magnets, so just bear that one in mind and keep it clean. On the back of the device you have some ventilation as well as your main DC in, and I believe all of your display outputs, 2 mini display ports and an HDMI port. You'd also have a USB Type-C port, which isn't Thunderbolt compatible, so just bear that one in mind. On the right hand side you have 2 USB 3 ports with an SD card reader, obviously some more ventilation, and on the left hand side you have USB 2 ports, gigabit Ethernet with a sort of slimline fold out style, and your headphone and microphone jacks. Opening up the clamshell, you can see the rather nice 1080p display. This one has excellent viewing angles both top to bottom and side to side, so I'm really very impressed with it. Color reproduction looks decent, and you can change some of that in the settings that I'll show you in a minute, but otherwise I was very happy and overall very impressed with the display. Just above the display is the built-in webcam and microphone. Here's a quick test of that. So here's a quick test of the built-in microphone and camera. The camera isn't too bad at 720p, it's not brilliant, it's a little bit on the grainy side, but the microphone, I don't know that I would necessarily wholly recommend it. I would also mention that despite the CPU only being used at about 20% load, as you can probably hear, the CPU fan has kicked on and it gets pretty loud even at base levels, and even especially on startup, the laptop can get really rather loud. And obviously below the display you've got the keyboard and trackpad. Now the keyboard itself is a sort of faux mechanical type keyboard. It has a scissor switch still, as most laptops do, but it does have that sort of faux mechanical click to it. Now I would mention that there is a lot of key wobble here, so it really feels like just a really non-premium typing experience, and especially now that they've added the click as opposed to just doing a normal keystroke style, it feels incredibly mushy, and I really can't recommend typing on this personally, and for me this could potentially even be a deal breaker for some, so bear that in mind, and if you can test it out or something, then I highly recommend you try that first before you actually go and purchase a model yourself. Now the trackpad obviously sits just below the keyboard and is actually pretty decent size considering this is a 15-inch laptop. Now in terms of its usability, it still has all of your usual features, so 2-finger scrolling and swiping in for the action menu and stuff like that, and also it has, while no physical hardware buttons, it does have the ability to press anywhere on the surface and still get your left click, as well as obviously just like double tapping and things like that. Now I would mention there was a bit of a kind of inconsistency and a bit of a bug with the touchpad that I'll be speaking to PC Specialist about, but basically anytime I held my finger on the trackpad just perfectly still, or as still as I physically can, I'm a bit shaky, but it was happening for my partner as well, who doesn't shake that much. Basically the trackpad, or the cursor on screen, would be jumping about wildly and would often even do things like right clicking and left clicking purely just while holding your finger still on the trackpad. trackpad. This was something that stopped happening for a small amount of time and then started happening again, and I can't seem to determine if it's a software or hardware bug, so this may not present itself if you do pick one of these up, and it may be, you know, fixed in software, or it may just be that I have a slightly buggy touchpad. Now, I mentioned a second ago that there is some software pre-built into the laptop, and this is, as you can see here, it's relatively simple, allows you to do a couple of things, including changing the sort of performance modes and obviously changing things like the RGB lighting for the keyboard, but otherwise you don't really need to interact with it too much. Moving on to the gaming experience, I have to say that it was pretty fantastic, barring the keyboard feel that I've spoken about already. I'm really pretty disappointed with that, but the actual laptop itself, in terms of its, you know, hardware performance and the overall, as I said, just gaming experience, was actually pretty decent. Now, the fan, as I mentioned in the webcam test, is a pretty loud beast, and here's a quick audio test for that one. Now, I've noticed that even just doing regular non-gaming tasks, especially because of that 6-core CPU, the fans can ramp up pretty loud just under sort of like web browsing use at times, so that's something to keep in mind. I would also mention that while we're talking about usability, the battery life here, the battery itself is I think a 46 watt-hour battery, which means that it's the fairly standard gaming laptop battery life of around about a couple of hours of sort of standard usage, with then about an hour to less than an hour if you're gaming. And one final note before we jump into the performance results, the fan button that's next to the power button just above the keyboard is one for the sort of cooler boost type thing, where you press it and the fans ramp up to max speed, and you know, it lets you cool the laptop down with, you know, an excessive amount of noise, but still you know, lets you do that just fine. Now, I'd mentioned that because of the heat pipe arrangement inside the laptop, you actually end up with an incredibly hot button. It's brushed aluminium all along the top, which means that when you go to press that when you've been gaming on the laptop for any amount of time, it's actually at almost full kind of CPU or GPU temperature, which means that you almost certainly will burn your finger if you have it on for more than, you know, a quarter of a second. So just bear that one in mind. The heat does definitely rise up through there. So now, before I'm done the spec, the usability and all that sort of stuff, let's take a look at the gaming performance. Starting with 3D Mark Farstrike, we can see this one is just shy of 10,000 points. This is a little bit lower than the MSI GE63 that has a pretty similar configuration, but in Dirt Rally actually has the exact same FPS number, which is kind of both surprising and impressive nonetheless. Obviously, with that 60Hz display, 86 FPS average is going to be plenty fine. In GTA 5, we're looking at 126 FPS average, which is incredibly playable, obviously. With, as I said, that 60Hz screen, you're going to have more than enough performance room to keep kind of playing newer and newer games with no problems. And in Unity Heaven, we're seeing 89 FPS as well, which again is still pretty impressive and very smooth. And finally, before we move on to my thoughts on the laptop and obviously whether I would put this on my desk myself, I want to mention the internals and the temperatures. Now, even with the 3 or triple heat pipe setup that they have going on inside, and obviously the multiple heat exchanger points as well, and obviously dual fans too, this laptop was still incredibly hot. The CPU was running at a maximum of about 92 degrees Celsius, with the GPU running in the 85 to 87 degree range. Now, the GPU I'm not overly concerned with, as it sets its own temperature target and then boosts itself as much as it can until it hits that target, and then just kind of regulates itself there. So that one I'm not too concerned about, but the CPU one is a good bit higher, and obviously is a little bit more concerning for its sheer temperature and obviously its kind of longevity, if you like. So I don't know whether this is specifically just because this is a 6-core chip and obviously still running at a relatively high clock speed, or whether this is still just sort of symptomatic of the kind of newer Intel chips. Even the 7700K was running at these, or 7700HQ, sorry, was running at these sorts of temperatures. So yeah, not too sure, but just bear that in mind. So what do I think of the laptop? Well, overall, I think it's pretty decent. It's actually a pretty decent value for money. It's selling for £1,279 plus VAT, I believe, for this configuration. You can get them for cheaper if you pick different configurations, so feel free to take a look at the link in the description if you want to pick your own one up. But nonetheless, comparing that to, say, the MSI GE63 that has basically the same configuration as this one, that one is, I think, think £1,400-ish, so it's not too bad in terms of value for money. I would mention though that, as I said, that keyboard really does let the product down, and really overall can't wholly recommend it purely because of that. The display is lovely, the overall performance level is great, the fan noise is pretty loud, but you can probably get used to it, especially if you have headphones on. The temperatures aren't wildly terrible. You know, most of the other laptops, including the MSI one that I mentioned there, runs at a pretty similar temperature, so again, maybe symptomatic of the chips themselves. And also the trackpad issue, again, that may be my one, but just bear that in mind. If you do get it, feel free to contact PC Specialist. I'm sure they'll try and sort you out. So to round this all off then, would I put this on my desk? Personally, no. The keyboard is just too kind of wobbly, mushy, and generally not that great for me personally. You may find that you can get used to it, or that, you know, this is a little bit more preferred to you than a more firm and kind of not key wobbly kind of experience. So, you know, feel free to try one out and see if you fancy it. But for me personally, I would go with no. Now, otherwise, I still do relatively recommend the laptop, as I said, if you can get over the keyboard, but they do also have multiple other variants for, you know, PC Specialist laptops, so feel free to take a look at those as well if you're still interested. As I mentioned, if you did want to pick one of these up, there'll be a link in the description down below that will take you to their website where you can configure your own model. If you want to support the channel and keep me making these videos on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and occasionally Saturday basis, then feel free to take a look at the links in the description down below, including the Amazon affiliate link. When you're buying from there, if you just click the link before you do so, massively helps me out, and I genuinely thank anyone who uses them. You can also check out the other videos over here. If you're new to the channel, feel free to hit that subscribe button for more videos like this, and otherwise, thank you for watching, and we'll see you all in the next video.